Opendoor enters the weekend with a story that isn't being fully appreciated by the broader market, but is absolutely resonating across the tech and real estate corners of social media. And that's because while the stock market is closed, Opendoor's narrative stayed wide open. This weekend wasn't about price action, filings, or earnings reports. It was about something much more important, a public look into the philosophy, the product velocity, and the leadership mindset driving Opendoor 2.0. And make no mistake, the signals this weekend were meaningful. At the Hope Global Forums, CEO Carrie Benjamin Kazbarek once again delivered the same core message he's been hitting since taking over as CEO. Speed matters more than people think, execution beats debate, and the future of real estate will belong to the companies that stop overthinking and start building. Kaz made the point that in most industries, innovation isn't limited by technology but by the processes people cling to. And when you step back, you can see how perfectly this fits Opendoor's mission. It isn't just building a real estate platform. It's rebuilding the entire experience around simplicity, speed, and consumer empowerment. Kaz talked again about the stretch goal of compressing a home purchase to as little as 3 days. And this isn't just an inspirational soundbite. It's the clearest articulation yet of Opendoor's long-term roadmap, a world where buying a home becomes a fast, low-friction, technology-driven consumer experience. And just like he's hinted in the past, he once again brought up the idea of returnability, the concept that a home could eventually be something you try, live in, and return if it doesn't end up fitting your life. Now, that idea is still theoretical in its final form, but the direction is unmistakable. Opendoor isn't trying to make real estate incrementally better. It's trying to reshape the psychological relationship consumers have with housing altogether. Kaz's Hope Forum comments weren't just visionary. They were strategic. He framed the housing transaction as an outdated process held back by inefficiency, friction, and legacy thinking. And then he positioned Opendoor as the one company not bogged down by that inertia. A company moving fast, iterating weekly, simplifying products, and building toward a future that traditional real estate isn't prepared for. What casual observers miss is that these speeches are part of a bigger narrative pattern. Kaz keeps reinforcing the same message because he's actively reshaping investor expectations. He's repositioning Opendoor from a real estate company with technology to a technology company that happens to operate in real estate. And that shift matters because it changes how investors should value the long-term opportunity. But while Kaz was delivering the philosophy, Fahd Ananta delivered the product. And for Opendoor's business, this might be the more underrated piece of the weekend. 8 weeks ago, Opendoor introduced Early Move-In, a feature that allows buyers to get access to their home before closing. Since then, people have used it to move in furniture, set up their internet, store boxes, give tours to friends, and even take their kids trick-or-treating. In a world where real estate has been slow, rigid, and procedural for decades, this flexibility creates something traditional agents simply cannot compete with: emotional momentum. When buyers begin living in a home before closing, they develop attachment, confidence, and excitement. And that's incredibly powerful because it directly addresses one of the biggest psychological barriers in real estate: uncertainty. And then, this weekend, Opendoor expanded that feature dramatically. 3 meaningful updates were announced. First, buyers can now cancel their purchase anytime before closing with no penalty. 0 fees. 0 pain. 0 fallout. This is a friction-destroying change, and it's something nearly impossible to replicate in the traditional housing ecosystem. Second, Opendoor officially bundled Early Move-In, the 100-day warranty, and free cancellation into a unified brand, the Opendoor Guarantee. This is a strategic masterstroke. By naming the bundle, Opendoor transforms what used to feel like disconnected features into a single, cohesive consumer promise. This is how category-defining brands are built. And third, all of these features are now live across all Opendoor homes in Texas, with full nationwide availability targeted before the end of 2025. What makes this so meaningful is not just the features themselves, but the speed. Opendoor is shipping real changes every 8 weeks. And these aren't cosmetic UI tweaks. They're major structural shifts in how people buy homes. The traditional real estate world does not ship this fast. Their cycles are measured in years. Opendoor is moving in months, and sometimes weeks. That is the clearest sign yet that this is a true tech company, not a real estate company pretending to be one. When you combine Kaz's vision at Hope with Fahd's product update, a bigger picture emerges. Opendoor isn't building a transaction. It's building an ecosystem, something people are starting to call Amazon Prime for housing. Think about what Amazon did to retail. They took a painfully slow and unreliable process and made it fast, consistent, and predictable. That's exactly what Opendoor is doing to real estate. The industry's biggest problem isn't demand. It's friction. And Opendoor is attacking friction from every angle: speed, guarantees, optionality, convenience, and now cancellation flexibility. What's fascinating is how the investor community is reacting. Across social media, people aren't talking about home price indexes or mortgage rate charts. They're talking about experience design. They're talking about consumer psychology. They're talking about the idea of trying a home before buying it. They're talking about the 100-day warranty. They're talking about early move-in becoming standard. They're talking about whether Opendoor's guarantee becomes the moat that Zillow and Redfin cannot replicate. When investors start debating product experience instead of financial statements, that's a signal. It means the narrative is shifting. It means people are beginning to view Opendoor the way tech investors view companies like Tesla or Amazon, not as cyclical businesses but as platform companies that redefine user expectations. So what does all of this mean for the stock heading into the coming week? In terms of direct catalysts, nothing new has been released. There are no filings, no guidance changes, no macro shocks. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. In fact, this kind of weekend narrative building is often more important than a midweek price swing. Because what it does is strengthen the underlying conviction story. It reinforces the idea that Opendoor is executing, innovating, and moving toward a clearly articulated long-term vision. Investors who follow this company closely know that the real story is not the daily chart. It's the expanding gap between Opendoor's product velocity and the rest of the industry's stagnation. And remember, Opendoor enters the weekend having defended the $7 level. It has shown resilience in a market that has been volatile, uncertain, and filled with macro noise. Now combine that price stability with a weekend full of product momentum, leadership messaging, and investor conversation. What you get is a narrative coiled spring, a stock building pressure not through hype, but through execution. And that matters because market perception is built on two things: what a company builds, and how consistently it builds it. This weekend was another reminder that Opendoor's leadership is aligned, its product direction is clear, and its innovation cycle is accelerating. So the angle for investors heading into next week is simple. Ignore the noise. Watch the signal. And the signal is this: Opendoor is the only company consistently reshaping what home buying feels like. A 3-day transaction. A returnable home. A guarantee bundle. Early access. Zero penalty cancellation. These are not small features. These are the early architectural pieces of a radically different housing experience. The weekend didn't bring new stock movement, but it brought clarity. And clarity is far more valuable. Whether the market recognizes it tomorrow, next month, or next year, the direction is unmistakable. Opendoor is not just iterating. It is redefining. And the companies that win in consumer technology are the ones that redefine the experience, not the ones that simply survive the cycle. That's why weekends like this matter. While everyone else is distracted, Opendoor is quietly building the future of housing. And eventually, the market catches up.